Birds and Locals Farm to Table Dinner on Tuesday, but this event is always sort of the official opening of festival weekend, so thank you for being here and for being part of this with us. Out of curiosity, how many people in here are from out of state? Wow. Okay, for those of you, I'm looking at you, you're not looking at each other. I would say that's 75% of the audience just raised their hands. So welcome to our town. Welcome to our valley, and welcome to the 29th Annual Trailing of the Sheep Festival. Last year, we had our maps out, which we'll have at the fair and the trials and the closing party, and we had people mark themselves as being from 46 states and multiple countries. So we are a bucket list festival. Word's gotten out, and people are coming to join us throughout the weekend every year. I want to thank our founders, Diane and John Peavy. We lost John last year, but this is their legacy for certain. He loved the festival, and their vision and passion for us all to learn about the history of sheep in Idaho is why we're all here now. And when you heard John speak about his ranch and his animals, it was his passion that shined through and brought us to this festival. We started the John Peavy Legacy Fund to honor him and gave away our first scholarship to a young man from Cary, Idaho that started studying agriculture as a freshman at the University of Idaho this year. And we will be continuing the scholarship tradition in his honor. I just want to briefly share the starting of the festival. A lot of people don't know exactly how we began, and it really was, again, back to Diane and John Peavy. So about 30 years ago, our recreational district wanted to put in a paved bike path for people to use to bike, skateboard, rollerblade, walk your dog, etc. But it was part of the natural sheep's driveway that the sheep had been trailing up and down the valley for 150 years. So they approached the ranchers, and they said, we want to put in this paved bike path. And the rancher said, that's fine, but do know we're still going to be trailing the sheep up and down this driveway. And everyone said, great, 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 it'll all be great, it'll all be fantastic. Well, the bike path went in, and at the time, John was running for Idaho office, and his phone started ringing off the hook, and people were saying, get your sheep off my bike path. And he said, well, you know, and he was a very soft-spoken man, the sheep have been around for a really long time, so why don't you come have coffee with me, and then we'll trail the sheep together, and you can learn a little bit more about the history of this community. And so they did that, and then the next year more people came, and then more people came, and more people came. And after a few of those, Carol Waller, who's with us tonight, was running the chamber, and Diane Peavy said, we have a festival here. And so we were born totally out of a need to educate people in our community. And that's why we're still here, to celebrate the sheep industry, bring people together, and share the stories of the animals and the ranchers and their families in the land. So that's why we're here. That's what you're going to hear all weekend, so thanks for being here. I quickly want to say thank you to our board of directors, the advisory council, the finance committee meeting. Special thanks to Zole Uranga and Lori Strobel from our team that checked you in today. Thanks to the Arduous for their generosity as a community partner, and for all the supporters who make this festival happen. We are a 501c3 nonprofit festival. Everyone doesn't always know that, but we try and bring in funds to keep our largest events free into perpetuity. We never want anyone to pay to go to the parade. We never want anyone to pay to go to the fair. So those supporters help make this happen. So I just want to thank a few people specifically, the American Land Board, D.L. Evans Bank, Catherine and Ray Echeverry, the Idaho Commission on the Arts, the Idaho Wool Growers Association, Martha Jennings, Marcia and Don Liebig, Joyce and Doug McCallum, Sally and Mark Onetto, the Page Foundation, the Spring Creek Foundation, Power Engineers, Spur Community Foundation. Thanks to them. A big round of applause, because their gracious support as premier sponsors makes this happen. A few reminders of the rest of the weekend. The championship sheepdog trials run tomorrow from 9 to 5 out in Haley on Buttercup Road. If you make it to Buttercup Road, you can't miss it. We basically have a pop-up event in the middle of a field with tents and flags and things, so you can't miss it. The Folklife Fair is tomorrow from 10 to 4 in Roberta McKercher Park in Haley. Vendors, cultural performers, the Basques, the Scottish, and the Peruvians, food and drink, and just merriment, and maybe a little rain, so bring an umbrella. Please also, if you haven't already, the Good Shepherd Monument that we erected a few years ago is adjacent to the park. It features 8 life-size sheep, a herder, and a horse, and it's just a beautiful testament to the ranching community. The Sheep-Ridge concert tomorrow night is actually sold out, so I can't tout that anymore. But you can use tomorrow night to find great American lamb somewhere in town, or maybe pick some up at Atkinson's Boise River Lamb. You might have heard about them this week, and make some at home. And finally, on Sunday, we have a free sheep herding stories event that morning at 9:30 at the Limelight, where Jerry Seifert, our board president and local historian, sits down with Tom Peavy, John's son, and Denny Burks, who helped manage Flat Top Ranch, and they talk about the history and the community and the impact. It's a free event, and it's a great one to come and ask questions and learn a little more. And then, of course, it all culminates in the Big Sheep Parade on Sunday, 12 noon, Main Street, Faulkner Land and Livestock, providing the sheep, sponsored by the City of Ketchum, D.L. Evans Bank, and the Thurston Charitable Foundation. This is a special program tonight, Voices from Solitude, the Basque Tree Carvings in the American West. And Immigrant Shadows is the exhibit you see here. They're going to speak to that a little bit more, but I want to thank Amy and Earl in the audience. This is theirs, so raise your hands real quick so people know. They put this together, and it's beautiful, and we thank you. So I'd like to introduce John Beater, Professor of History at Boise State University, and Anaki Arrieta Barro, Head of the John Bilbao Basque Library at the University of Nevada, and Daniel Fergus, Director of A1, the Technology and Media Production Hub in the Mathewson IGT Knowledge Center at the University of Nevada, Reno. He was part of the creation of the virtual Arborglyphs exhibit, which you can experience at the fair tomorrow. Have a wonderful evening. See you this weekend. Gentlemen.
First of all, thank you everyone for being here tonight. It's a great pleasure and honor. My name is Iñaki Arrieta, as Laura mentioned. I'm the head of the John Bilbao Basque Library at the University of Nevada, Reno, and I'm here with my colleagues, Dr. Bitter and Daniel Fergus. And we are here tonight to speak about tree carvings, or lerchrum marrak, as we call them in Basque, and their connection with the Basque experience in the United States and sheep herding. And we are part of a larger group of researchers called the Arborglyph Collaborative. And for introducing ourselves, we have a short video that we would like to show you tonight.
There are treasures hidden in the natural landscapes of the American West. Arborglyphs, tree carvings etched by Basque immigrant sheep herders who once tended flocks of thousands across these lands and who camped miles from civilization and a continent away from home. As sheep grazed the solemn hills, the sheep herders carved musings into these pillars of bark and limb. The designs capture their solitude, loneliness, love, and identity. Decades later, these trees and arborglyphs are increasingly at risk, threatened by wildfires, urban development, and time itself. Without action, these messages from the past will be forever lost. The Arborglyph Collaborative seeks to change that. We're creating ways that anyone can help document these carvings by using current technology, information gathering techniques, and establishing partnerships, all of which will lead to a resource that can be accessed throughout the world. Join us on this journey to save these raw and unfiltered experiences etched in aspen. The Arborglyph Collaborative, preserving the past, informing the future.
Well, first, hope you enjoyed the video. First, thanks for coming out tonight and spending your time with us. Your time is the most valuable thing, and we appreciate you coming out. We've mentioned a little bit about documenting the arborglyphs, and for those of you that have been teachers, you know that every now and again you get one that just takes off with an idea. And that's what happened here. One of my students, non-traditional students, Earl, got introduced earlier, just went head over heels with the arbor glyphs. The title of this exhibit is Immigrant Shadows, and I think it's very well defined or titled in the sense that most of these immigrants that ended up doing this kind of work, and it continues today, are largely anonymous. We really don't know who they are very much, but they're doing work that feeds us, gives us clothing and all kinds of things. Earl decided he wanted to do castings of the arbor glyphs, and if you look at those here, that's what he's done. If I have it right, Earl, you also, I don't think it's accurate today, but you also hung them, when the exhibits that you've done, at the height that you found them, if I'm not making that up. There we go, good. Then Earl matched with a friend of his, Amy. I think, is Amy here? I'm not sure. There you go, there you are. And they put together this exhibit, which I think just sets the stage, literally, very well for us. So thank you very much, and a round of applause, if you would, for Earl and Amy.
Thank you. I think that this is a great example of how inspiring the arbor glyphs, the tree carvings are. We will see some examples of this during the presentation. They have some kind of connection to emotions. They're visually very appealing, and they spark creativity. So I think that one of the layers that makes them really attractive for artists and for historians and for anthropologists. So before going forward with the arbor glyphs, the first thing we like to talk about is about busks. Many of you will know, having some kind of connection to the sheep herding industry, some of you being Basque yourself, will not need an explanation of who the Basques are, but let's take a look back to the old country and see how it looks like today. The Basque country in Europe, it's located in the corner of the Bay of Biscay. It's a small country, a small land, especially if we compare it with the American West. Usually being in Nevada, we'll compare it with Clark County, it's more or less like the Las Vegas County. It's not larger than that, but with a population as high as 3 million, which I want to say is larger than Idaho, is that correct?
Yep.
More or less like the population of Nevada, quite packed in an area that is 8,000 square miles, more or less. Probably the most interesting feature about Basque culture, being a country that it's in that corner between two large cultural groups, as Spaniards, as French are, is having been able to maintain its own culture and especially its own language, which is a very unique language if we compare it with any other in the area. And this is the land where many of the sheep herders during the late 19th century and the 20th century came from to the American West.
All right, so how did they end up from the Basque Country with this map? Let me walk you through this a little bit. Actually, the earliest Basques that come to the American West don't come directly from the Basque Country, they come from South America. It's a secondary migration. What's bringing them? The gold rush. 1849 sets off this invitation for people all around the world to come to the American West and see if they can make their riches in gold. So the very first that come actually end up in California. It's a west to east story. You and I we think about what we say, the Midwest. The Midwest is only the Midwest when you're thinking about it from the east to the west. If you're on the west, you say that's the Midwest. Do you see what I'm getting at? Is that this story complicates the narrative because so many first came from the south up to the west and then found out fanned out first to California, Nevada, and then up into Idaho as Idaho was becoming a state, 1890. These you can see the other locations where there are significant bass populations and herding of sheep. And here, this picture pictures might look familiar to you. These are all taken from around this area, realizing the importance of the sheep industry in the late 1890s into the earlier part of the 20th century, the early 1900s. There were 2.2 million head of sheep, exponentially far more sheep than people. We've just crossed a couple million here in Idaho. So it gives you an idea of the demand for labor that this kind of quantity of sheep that you'll see some in here needed, required. And hence the Scottish, the Basques, and then later the Peruvians took advantage of this opportunity.
Keep in mind that
Yes. So this I think should be pretty familiar to a lot of you in the sense that sheep herding became the occupation. Why sheep herding? Well, I'll say it. I interviewed one herder. I said, well, why did you become a sheep herder? And he said, well, what do you think I was going to do, become a stockbroker? I mean, what am I trying to say? They had no English language. They had very little education. And so sheep don't care what language you speak, and they don't require a particular education. You need to learn how to be a sheep herder. But this was an occupation that they could do. Many of them came from rural areas, farmsteads in the Basque Country, farmhouses from the Basque Country. They were used to herding a small number of sheep, but nothing like the numbers that we're going to see here. And you can see the prominence of it because Life magazine did a whole feature and series on the Basques here herding sheep in the American West. All right, so this is one of my favorite carvings, and it's right from Neo Canyon. I have to go up and see if it's still there. I don't know if it's still there or not. I haven't been up for a while. So what happens? Well, we're getting into what are the arbor glyphs and what are they doing? Well, when you have time, maybe some of you doodle. If you were in a really boring class, not mine, somebody else's, it was a really boring class, maybe you're doodling, maybe you're drawing. There's something in us that wants to create. I want you to think about what's the longest amount of time you have spent absolutely by yourself. How did you feel that time? The most time that you've spent alone. And think about what did you do with that time? And what happens, I think, for most of us is if we get in solitude, things surface for us. And this is an example of maybe a connection back to home. The farmhouse, I'm putting words in this artist's mouth, this carver's mouth, but maybe thinking about the farmhouse that he left. And so this always, for me, is a reminder of when we carve, when we doodle, when we literally make a mark and try to say, hey, I'm here, I'm alive, I'm somebody, maybe I'm just doing this for myself or for my buddy that might come around a year or two from now when it finally scars and opens up. Maybe he'll remember me, or maybe we'll stay connected that way. There's something in this as humans that wants to create, and here's one of the examples of it.
talking about favorites, this is one of my favorite tree carvings. Why this is a castle. This is a castelua in Basque. John was mentioning, what do you do when you are alone? You retreat yourself. You go to revisit your emotion. You go to your inner castle. That inner castle of the philosophers. So for me, this castle, this Gastelua, it's a great example of why the sheep herders that were by themselves with little human contact during the time that they were spending in the sierras, they will retreat internally. Why they will try to, at the same time, be themselves and mark the land, because that's one of the things they are doing. They are marking the place. They are saying, I'm here. And at the same time, they are displaying their inner self, their internal emotions.
There's a little bit more context, I think, but we need to provide about the creation of the arbor glyphs and just the sheep herder experience in general. There was a clause in the insurance package that the Basque community created itself. It's not unusual for immigrant groups, especially at that time, to create some kind of insurance fund. Well, they had a fund, and they created this group, and part of a clause within it said, if somebody went sagebrushed, and sagebrush meant that they snapped. They mentally could not endure the solitude for that long. Now, the sheep herder life now includes, radios and telephones and much more ability to be able to communicate. But for those earliest groups, they often spent large times alone, 18 years old, 19 years old, into their early 20s. And so I think that's an important thing to do. I think what some of them, and some we've interviewed, saw this as an outlet for them to be able to express themselves, something that could connect them back to home.
And connecting back to home, but also connecting to themselves and to somehow showcase their identity. One of the most usual things they will do is to carve, to etch their names. So the most usual carving we'll see, we all love the houses, we all love the castles, we will love all the drawings, but the most usual ones, and we see those by the thousands still, are letterings, are writings, and most usually names, dates, and place names. In this specific example, we wanted to show this today, also to talk a little bit about how they were physically created, how they were made. When you, or at least when I imagine at first how the tree carvings were created, I always imagine them being carved once, and they will stay like that as long as the tree lives. But that's not exactly the case. What we will see is that the carving, it's alive, as the tree is alive. So there is a phenomenon that we can see very clearly here, where very fine lines will widen as the tree grows. Okay. So what happens here is that this tree, when it was marked, when it was etched, it was very young, and what will happen is that the lines that were carved, but they were carved by just their usual everyday knife, those lines will grow along with the tree. And that widening of those lines will happen, okay? These wide lines that we see here are the result of the growing of the tree, not because they were etched in that way. They were etched as lines, as the horizontal ones are here, but as the tree grows, the lines will widen along with the tree. And this is one of the examples we were talking about earlier. a name, Etienne Maris Correna, and a date. This is so human, isn't it? To say, hi, I'm here today, August 21st, 1932, Etienne Maris Correna, who probably was a 18, 19, 20-year-old guy that came from the Basque Country, by himself, decided that it was a good moment to say, this is me, this is Etienne, and I am here today, okay? The examples we are showing tonight are coming from our own collection, from Boise State Special Collections, and from the Jobilbao Basque Library collections. This one and the other ones you will see similar to this one, all of them are from the Philip and Jean Earl collection.
This is one that's actually from this area as well, Neal Canyon as well. As what Iñaki mentioned, the most common one that we will say are names and dates. And I can remember this grove, I remember going through it and finding it. You can see on the left, bottom left, others are come and are carving behind it. It may be, Phil likes Alice or whatever, but you also see, and you'll see this, Peruvians are coming and doing the carving as well. I just wanted to mention one other thing with this, and as I was talking about the solitude and the challenges with that, I forgot one of the most important things is it was written within the insurance clause that any herder that had those kinds of troubles would be taken back to the Basque Country, and so they would be taken care of. I didn't want to leave them alone. And so there's a real sense of community that they built to make sure that they took care of each other, knowing about the challenges that can come from being alone that long. Here's another one. You're probably familiar with this, huh? I love it when they carve, no words, no names, no nothing. Carro Campo, this is where I spent my evenings, my time if there's bad weather. There it is.
Very similar to the one we saw earlier in the picture.
All right, well, these are young men. I think you can probably identify what this picture is. These are young men, and while we do find crosses in religious items, we also find a fair amount of desire for companionship that they were hoping for in the hills. So you will see quite a few carvings of women, nude women, lots of them.
Many of them.
Yes,
many of them.
it's true.
We see in drawings and in writing too. Some of the things we read, you blush when you read those. But also, being Basque, as they were, they love dancing, so they will also look for that connection through dancing. This is a beautiful example of from their collection of a couple dancing. You can see the man wearing a chapela or a Basque beret. We see the widening we saw earlier in the writing, not so marked because it's larger, but it's a great example of that art.
Iñaki, would you mind describing, since we're talking about different ways that they've been captured, would you mind describing what this is or how this was captured?
So this is a robin made on muslin, so cotton textile, and they will, Jean and Philip Earl will wrap the tree. One of the issues, one of the challenges we have when capturing tree carvings is that they are in a cylinder. So the trunk of the tree is a cylinder. So usually the writing or the drawing will go around the tree. So taking a picture usually is not going to capture the whole piece. And they have different approaches to how to somehow fix that issue. And one of the approaches has been the creation of ribbons with wrapping around the tree. So they will wrap the tree with the muslin and then use black wax to mark the underlying art. Then that for librarians and archivists creates another problem that you will see very easily. So the trees, the carvings themselves are challenging to preserve. But then with these reproductions, we add another layer there. Because these aren't purely, they aren't only reproductions. There is a selection, there is an interpretation of what's going on there. So we now have two great problems, that we need to preserve the carving, the underlying carving, but we also need to preserve that reproduction that it's another level of interpretation.
Gene and Earl were not of Basque ancestry, not connected at all, but fell in love with the trees and spent so much of their time documenting them. This is the other kind of theme that we may see are hometowns. And this is Ondarru. We got anybody from Ondarru here? Probably not.
From Vizcaya?
Vizcaya?
No?
Ah,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
there we go.
Some from Vizcaya.
Go to Vizcaya.
Go to Vizcaya.
But what I loved about this, I mean, you can just see it. So here's the hometown that he writes. One of my favorite things here is I was actually in this town and then came home about a week later, and then we were going up to the hills, and that's when we found this one. And it was just crazy to be in the town and then a little time later to identify. But, you know, you can see it's them wanting to connect back to where they're from. It's a fishing village right along the coast. Beautiful spot. Here's another one. It's about politics. Gore Euskadi. A number of, especially later on, those that were part of a later immigration came during the Franco years. Many of them did not want to serve in Franco's army and consequently came here. Was one of the reasons that spurred them to come here, to not have to be part of the military. Gore Euskadi up with the Basque country, the Basque state. And if he would have screamed that in the plaza from where he was from, he could have been arrested. It could have, but here he is carving it into the trees in Idaho. So politics, another element that they're interested in, and carving.
That's actually California, but okay. Calendar trees. We are in love with calendar trees. Why are we in love with calendar trees? Because they are tree carvings square or cube. We see the same herder that is visiting the same spot once and again, year by year, probably around the same time of the year. We have a wonderful talk earlier today, and one of the topics that were mentioned were the cycles related to sheep herding. So these herders probably were visiting the same area more or less around the same time of the year. And there was this herder that will take the time every year to carve the tree with the date they were there. How deep is that connection to the land? How strong is that need to be seen, to be remembered, which is one of the key reasons why we humans create in general, why we write, why we carve, why we create art, like the one we are seeing here. So we love this type of carvings because really are wonderful examples of all the reasons why the Lerchum Marrak, the arboglyphs, the tree carvings are great representations of that Basque American experience.
Here's another one that depicts that same kind of work that Earl and his wife did. Guriama, Guriama, our mother. So you can see him, whoever's carving, you can just barely make it out in the tree. Very hard to see. If you look at the top part, you can see the face. Can you kind of make that out in there a little bit? Again, this is a bit of a infomercial for how much we want to document as many as we can, as quickly as we can, because we've lost a lot and we're losing a tremendous number each, kind of each season. But it's a reminder of just a longing for home. He was remembering his mother and carving about that.
Building up on that urgency, the example on the right is from the 1990s. This picture here on the left was taken last Monday, and it's really in very bad shape. It looks better in the picture than it looks in reality. So the bark of the trees separating is broken. It's probably not going to survive the winter, but at least this one we capture it. But again, there are thousands like this in our mountains.
And this begins to get into the different ways that we are trying to document them. And we'll show you some different ways besides just pictures. We're showing you some of the others. But this gets into some things that we have been working on and that we will continue to work on in the future.
As we mentioned, the one on the left is from the Air collection. The one on the right is from another very important collection on tree carvings, the José Mallea collection that we host at the Basque Library. José Mallea was actually the person that really defined the tree carvings as research objects and really made them visible to the community and to researchers. And maybe John can talk a little bit about his experience with him and researching with him.
Yeah, José Mallea, we need to tip the hat to him. He's the one that got me started on this. He gave a program at Nevada Reno and said, listen, if you want to try and document the Basque immigrant story, part of it is certainly in the boarding houses with the women. The other part of it is up in the hills with trees and sheep. And so that's where you need to go. They didn't leave selfies. They didn't keep diaries. They carved into trees. So get out there and start doing it. So he was working in California and Nevada, started working here in Idaho, but it's really him that got this whole thing going. So now what we're trying to do is update, take advantage of the technology that we have and the things that it is able to do that will allow us to preserve it in different ways. This is what we're trying to capture here, photogrammetry, the 3D imaging of these arborglyphs that can really give you a 360 view and see some detail that you just can't see any other way, I'd argue. Take a look at this. Can you see the 1817, August? You can manipulate it, move it around, see what, you can bring it up as close as you want to see if you can see what you can see. It's amazing. And this is our colleague, Daniel Ferguson, who's going to come up later, who's really spearheaded all of this work. Let me give you one example. This is one of my favorite. I think it's the oldest one that we found, 1890. But we have a dispute because you can't tell if it says 1890 or 1895. This kind of technology will help us be able to see that's a 5. But that's the oldest one that in Idaho at least, that we've identified. Powerful tool. So this is one that many of you will be familiar with, Eagle Creek and Neal Canyon. I remember being up there, actually it was after we had spent some time with the Peavies and identified a number of arbor-glyphs that they were familiar with. They got us up into this area. I'm sad to say it did not look like that when we first worked with it. But you can see this is one. We'll go ahead and Yaki, pick up the second half. This is the 3D modeling of it. This will allow you to get that kind of detail that we were talking about before, where you really can't see it, and it's really hard to make it out here. But when you really can zoom in and move it all around, you can see all kinds of elements of it that you can't make out as the bark breaks away and it's damaged that way.
So in this specific case, you can compare a photograph on the left with the 3D model created on the right. That's a capture from the application we are using for doing that, and just you can see the depth that you couldn't see on the photograph. And if you enter the application, you will see the kind of model we will see in the previous example.
And this takes us just to our last couple slides. It's a graduate student of mine, Joseph Negro from Boise State. And we are seeing just one example of the Peruvians that have followed in behind the Basques, carving in trees, as you can see. Peru, 2014, you can see the date. Very much that same process. I need to mention that the Basques, they didn't carve in trees in the Basque Country. This is not anything that they brought with them. It was something that they did and really kind of created here. But you can see that the next immigrant group that has come behind them is following along doing the same kind of artistic work on aspen trees, that soft bark that allows them to carve into it with a knife, a nail, and then the scarring of which stands out.
Beyond expanding the project to other cultural groups like the Peruvians, we are also expanding venues on how we capture these photographs or 3D models, depending on the case. So the example we have here on the left was sent to us by a photographer, but Jim Markle. And for that, he used a channel that we just started a few months ago, which is an app that you all can use. And I'm going to give the room to Daniel to explain a little bit about that too.
Yeah, so I'm sure you're all wondering how you can help preserve at this point, and you're in luck. We've gotten an option for you to assist with us. So while there are still a lot of tree carvings left, these aspen live maybe 60, 80, depending on the climate and the type, maybe 130 at most years old. So most of them are gone. We're running out of time. We need help with people like you, hikers, hunters, whoever might be just coming across one that you feel may not be documented. Even if you think it had been, go ahead and just, you can submit it in our app. We're trying to keep it relatively simple, so we just have you put your name, the date of when you found it, a general description. We're trying to harness mobile devices that can connect to like GPS when you're out in the field so that we can get the coordinates when you do take the photo. And the next step is you can take a couple, 4 at most, shots around the tree and then upload it to our server. And that will come to our resources at the University of Nevada, Reno, Boise, and Cal State Bakersfield as part of the collaborative. So another thing that I wanted to mention, tomorrow I'm going to give a little shout out to the VR experience. Part of the thing that we're trying to do is not only inform people about the tree carvings, but for a lot of people, they don't know who these Basque sheep herders are. So we created a virtual experience where we have it kind of gamified, where we have photos from our digital collections with a little backstory of a Basque immigrant sheep herder who comes back to a sheep camp. They interact with 3D models that have been captured using photogrammetry. It was the Laxalt collection that we captured from the Basque Library at the University of Nevada, Reno. We have a couple scenes when they're out in the vast landscape, which was kind of a shock for a lot of them when they first arrived to the expanse of the American West. And of course, we have the tree carvings, one of which you might recognize from the Earl collection. We took the wax rubbings, mapped them onto a virtual tree, and then extracted it for a kind of a creative interpretation of what that would look like. So this is gameplay footage. That's why it looks a little bit shaky. It doesn't look like that when you're in the headset, but just giving you a quick little preview where you can go around, try to find a few aspen trees. It's only a minute long, sure, we'll play it through. You can kind of see the landscape and some of the different carvings that they have there. We have 4 scenes in total, and each kind of tell a little bit of a narrative behind it. So if you're free tomorrow, swing by the tent, and the location will be where exactly? Yeah, I don't know the exact name.
McCurcher Park, yeah.
Thank you. So if anybody would like to swing by and experience it, feel free. I know there's some experienced sheep herders in here, so this is a very basic, rudimentary example of a day in the life of a sheep herder, but like for all of you to join and experience that. And that concludes the formal presentation, but I did want to let you know you can reach out to us through the email at lortunmarak@list.unr.edu, and we have a QR code for the website that we have, which will link you to that app I was referring to you earlier. So I think we'll just leave this slide up, so if anybody wants to capture that, feel free. And I think at this point we're open for questions.
Q&A.
And if you can wait until you have the mics so that in the recording they get the question on the recording, it'd be appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. Me, Oscar.
All right.
Okay, you have the names, first and last. In some cases, you have the cities. Have you tried to trace back these individuals and get their story, get a biography?
Short answer to that is yes. Yes. Those that were able to definitively connect hometowns and dates, and usually connected with other herders, because many of them herded sheep and then went back. For those that are here, it's much easier to make that connection. But you're hitting on the big part of the story. The big part of the story is over there. Those that left or those that went back, and the impact that it had on both sides. So it's challenging, but we have done many interviews from the local area connecting with hometowns. It's a little harder when you get doing it internationally because addresses, it changes over time, and so it can be a little challenging. Yeah, but we have worked on it. We have accomplished, I'd say, a fair amount of that. Mm-hmm.
Some of them are actually well known. Etienne Maris Correna, we mentioned his name earlier. There is a whole biography written about him. In other cases, what we are looking for, and that could be another venue for our research, is to connect it to additional sources of information. For example, one of the collections we have in our library is the register of the Santa Fe Hotel, which was a very well-known place for bus sheep herders to stay while they were in town. Hopefully, in the future, we will be able to connect the carvings they did during their stay in the Sierra with their records in the hotel while they were in town. There is a lot we can do really but the idea of approaching the carvings as a collection of documents, it's absolutely there for sure.
I will add, too, in the VR experience, one addition that we're hoping to have is some oral histories where you're out on the landscape or in the sheep tent and you can cycle through and just hear stories. So if any of you have family members who might have story recordings, I'm sure if you'd reach out to us, we'd be interested in potentially entertaining that as well.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
The Basque experience is probably close to a century long, and obviously their connection, especially here in Idaho, which I know about, to the political development and whatnot was significantly impacted. But in the last 20 years, the sheep herders have come from Peru mostly. So do you see changes in, they're doing the arbor glyphs, but do you see any changes in that, or are you documenting the Peruvian experience to see whether it compares essentially the same because they're doing the same thing, or is it different?
Yeah, I would say, well, two things. One is I listened to all the podcasts. If you haven't had a chance to listen to them, at the earlier event at the community library, there's 3 podcasts that look at the Scottish that came over, the Basque that came over, and the Peruvians that came over. And I think what I was struck with, to try and answer your question, is the similarities across, especially between the Basque and Peruvians. So we haven't captured as many of the Peruvians as we have of the Basque, because there aren't as many of them. Basques have a longer time period of carving, but from what we see, it seems to match. I haven't seen anything drastically different from what they did than from what the Basques have did. I don't know if you'd add anything else, Iñaki.
So one of the things we see, for example, in Northern California and Western Nevada, is that between Basques and Peruvians we have Mexicans, which I don't think is the case here in Idaho. And there we see changes in the kind of symbology they use. For example, in the case of Basque, you will see the lauburu, that Basque cross that maybe you are familiar with, very, very often. In the case of Mexicans, we see other kinds of symbols that I myself I am unable to interpret, but I hope Mexican expert will be able to do. Other things we see in the case of, and I'm talking mostly about Northern Nevada and Western Nevada and Northern California, because it's the area that I know better, is that there are less carvings. First, because they are less sheep herders, and second, because there are other ways they can spend the time. A couple of years ago, we were in a field trip in Jarvich, north of Elko. I'm very close to the border with Idaho, and we crossed paths with a Peruvian sheep herder. And he knew about the Lerchon Barrack, the 3 carvings. But, I have done it once. But how did he spend his time? Well, looking for the spot where he had cell coverage to speak with his family. Yeah, that's the kind of connection that the carvings were providing to the sheep herders in the 30s, in the 40s, in the 50s. It's provided by other means nowadays. So they are going to be less than those. We see some changes in the technique to carve but I think those are minimal. And I also want to mention, someone mentioned Scottish sheep herders earlier today. We have seen some Scottish sheep carvings from the late 19th century in, in Nevada. So it makes you wonder who started doing this, Basques or Scottish. We probably will never know it.
I just had a question about climate change and the health of the trees in preserving, the carvings. And what are you seeing?
Yeah, we're seeing bigger fires, hotter. Yes, there's no doubt that climate change is one of the major threats to what's happening here. And it's because of the size of the fires, their ability to even reach far more land than others, the earlier fires, I would say. Yes, we're noticing that, and makes it even more of an imperative trying to reach out to folks to try and document as much as we can. But it's an issue. I don't know. Yeah.
As a visual artist that pays attention to traditional artists and ancient artists, there's quite a bit of interest in outsider artists who never had formal training.
Yep.
And I'm wondering what you're doing to include those in the Art History Chronicle, because this is really extraordinary work. These are not,
Yes.
traditionally trained artists, but
Right.
this is so important to our culture, to immigration, to opening up that story to people that maybe don't relate to Mark Rothko or I mean, we could give you 100 names,
Sure.
right? But
2000.
I mean, that's the key here. I mean, they are not artists. They will tell you, why are you interested in these things?
Yeah.
Why?
Right.
Are you crazy? Or this is nothing. This is nothing. This is. We just, wrote on the trees. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I
and we
absolutely.
all make our marks somewhere on a picnic table or
I-
whatever.
No,
in
no,
a
no.
bathroom door.
So, yeah.
Sure. I absolutely agree with you, but let me tell you that they at first thought that there was no reason to have any interest on this because it was like nothing. But they are the voice of a silenced population.
Yes, thank you.
Uh, they are absolutely connected to the labor history of this country, and they are the voice of a migrant population that is, in a way, going away and disappearing. So we need to preserve this for all those
Yeah.
reasons.
Yeah.
Given that Idaho was the center of sheep herding in the world, maybe number two, in the late 19th century, early 20th century, did that mean there were a lot of sheep herders here? There had to have been. And then what happened to them? Did they migrate back home? Did they stay here and work, go into other industries as the sheep herding industry declined? I mean, at one time, Hill City had a population of 10,000.
Yeah.
I mean, it was huge. So what happened to everybody?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. The numbers are huge, are enormous, in the thousands if we look at that era of how many herders were here. A number of things happened. Number one, as synthetics came about, the need for the wool and the value of the wool went down. There is, I think all of us probably have stories of the way we think our life is going to play out and then the way it actually plays out. And that's what happened for the herders. They came here and they said, I'm going to come here, I'm going to make as much money as I can, and I am going back. And they came here and they saw this woman in the boarding house, and it went a really different way. Both of my grandparents are exactly that story. There are all kinds, though, that went back, that said, yeah, I'm going to do my 3 years, and then I'm going back, and that's it. I've had enough of being by myself. I'm going to go back, saved enough money to be able to do that. There are those that hated herding. Talked to one and just said, I hated it. I was lousy at it, and I hated it, and I couldn't wait to get to town. There are others that said, one said, the same one that said it, I would have been a stockbroker, said, oh, I'd give anything to go be a sheep herder for a while. Just the quiet and to be connected with nature. Oh, I'm starving for that. You got others that spent their whole life living in a boarding house and working with the sheep. That's what they did 40 plus years. So I wish I could say it was this and this, but it was this whole kind of fanning out experience of them. What made sense for them for the next step for them to take. And there's all kinds of responses to that. Yeah.
I have two unrelated questions, actually. The first is, are you working towards maybe some kind of interactive map where these trees are geolocated? People could click on them and go and look at things. That'd be pretty cool. And my second question is, why did they have to be by themselves? Why couldn't two people go out?
So they were by themselves because that was the way to manage the flock, the band. When they were during summer, not in all areas, but what we will see is one sheep herder, which is what you need to keep it under control. Why are you going to pay two sheep herders when you can have one? So they will have one sheep herder with one flock, with one band, probably various flocks, bands from the same ranch that will be supported by one camper that will visit them maybe once a week or maybe 7, 8, 10 days. That's the way it was. I mean, there wasn't any way better than that until trucks came along. Going back to the question about the map, short answer is no. There are a number of questions there. So we need to have a balance between providing access to these resources and being very careful with them. So many of them are in public lands, and just because of that, we will then be able, ourselves as researchers, to provide access to the exact location of those trees, because they are cultural artifacts that are managed by the federal government. And even if in the cases that's not specifically the situation, they are concerns about the preservation of those places, because usually the trees, what we are showing them, and that's kind of the way we tell the story, but we need to imagine that this doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in an area that is of cultural interest itself. It's an archaeological site probably, where generation of sheep herders have camped, and that makes them important for the history of that place that probably needs to be researched as from the point of view of archaeology. So in some cases we will be able, even legally, to provide access to the exact location. In other cases we probably wouldn't be comfortable doing that. That said, what we would like to do is to provide access to general areas and say, this, for example, it's son of Guriama, the one we showcased earlier. It's in the Tahoe National Forest, very close to Sierraville. Well, we can provide that for sure, but probably not in the near future, the exact location of the tree.
Just one other word on that. Sadly, we have shared some information, or information got out, and then gone back to that grove, and they've carved the carving out. They've taken it away. So we wish we could provide that map, but evidence says better to just give an idea, an area, but not give the precise location where it's at.
That the calendar trees are maintained by one shepherd? Or do we not know?
In some cases, we know it because of the style of the writing, and in some of the cases, they are named also. It's our assumption. Yeah, in the cases we see it very clearly, seems to be coming from the same hand. Yeah.
Excuse me, somewhere here. Where is it? Are there arbor glyphs on tree species other than aspen?
Boy, overwhelmingly, the ones we've worked on have been on aspen. I've seen some carvings, actually of a guy I knew, cutting into fir, but that's very hard. It's much more arduous to be able to do that. But short answer is yes. The most common and easiest way for them was the aspen because of the soft bark and the relatively quick healing of the scarring.
We know of a couple of examples on pines, but in those cases, they will need to remove the bark before doing the carving. And it's very unusual. I think we know exactly 2 cases.
My name is Neil, and I'm an arborist working and living out of Wood River Valley. I think one of the most challenging, thus rewarding parts about my work is looking at a tree in a snapshot in an instant and reading something about its life, and then relating that to people who coexist with the trees. So thank you for your topic, as it makes my job a little bit easier.
There you go.
My question has something to do about the timeline of arbor glyphs. And let's say someone tomorrow, they go north of Ketchum up into Sawtooth National Forest.
Yep.
And I'm not advocating for this, but let's say they carve up a bunch of trees.
They shouldn't carve trees
So
anymore.
here's my question. I suppose it matters who does the carving and what they inscribe, but at what point does that stop being destruction or vandalism of public land and start becoming a protected cultural artifact?
When those graffiti become art, there is not a clear and definitive answer to that question. Going back to a statute comment, yeah, don't carve trees in public lands anymore. It's no, you can't do that. Now, we see a lot of what Forest Service and even maybe you yourself call recreational carvings. I love someone, 2025. For now, we are not looking into preserving those. Now, that doesn't mean that there is no research interest on those. There is. I mean, if I am an anthropologist, I would like to know about those. for sure. Um, when it becomes art or culture, in part it's always culture. Any human activity is culture. When it becomes of interest for archivists and historians, it needs a little bit more weight, let's say. And weight here means amount, connection between them, the connection to the culture that created them, and the connection to the activities that were behind the reasons for creating them. It's not only the carvings, it's not only the marks on the trees, even if that's what we are trying to preserve. That's only a lens to what is behind that. That's what makes them so deep. Is that depth what makes them interesting and important?
Hi. Hi, I'm Jeanette. I'm from the Museum of Idaho in Idaho Falls, and I'm so glad you were here because I'm actually doing a teacher. Is this your book?
Oh, thank
Yes,
you.
it is. So we're doing a teacher camp this summer here on the Basque and the resilience and their immigration and the sheepdogs and everything. So this is great. We should just drove here to hear you speak. But and I hope I didn't miss it. But are any of the trees? Because there was a tree that was quite damaged, right? The one with the mother's face.
Yep.
Are any of the trees being preserved by actually cutting them, or just because the lifespan of an aspen, according to Google, is about 50 to 150 years?
Yeah,
although
that's
there's
right.
some 8,000-year-old colonies in Utah, but
Right.
have any of those trunks been cut to preserve, or are you just letting them die out, other than a cast?
Yeah. I can just speak for a number of them. The Basque Museum and Cultural Center has trees that have fallen down, but that still have clearly visible carvings. They have taken those out, and they're on display at the Basque Museum and Cultural Center. So the short answer is yes. They're hard to store because of the challenges of bugs and everything else that it attracts, and so you have to seal it. But the only place that I'm familiar with here in southwestern Idaho is the Basque Museum that has those and has saved those. Not just not pictures of it, the actual carvings themselves. Yeah.
At the Basque Library in Reno, we have, what to say, half a dozen, plus some trunks, actual trunks, plus some barks that were donated with by the Tahoe National Forest. The short answer is our goal is to preserve the carvings digitally. I mean, the challenges for trying to preserve even a selection of those are so huge. And the experience tell us that even in the case of the Basque Museum, they have issues keeping them even together. The State Museum in Carson City in Nevada, they needed to dispose of the ones they had because they were rotting actually, and they were unable to maintain them. Now when I see that Guriama, and we saw it last Monday, it's difficult to let them go. So I wouldn't say absolutely no to try to keep some of those. As I said, we have like 6 at this moment, and maybe we'll have some more in the future. But our goal in the preservation is in the digital realm, not in the physical one.
Go ahead. We got another one. Yeah.
Hi, good evening. My name is Doug. I'm an artist slash
great.
sculptor. Thank you for a wonderful presentation and all of the hard work you guys do. I'm sorry, but I can't remember the name of the artist of this work that's hanging right here.
Yeah.
And another question too, to follow with that, this handmade paper hanging here is beautiful, and I'm wondering if that is actual cast from these trees that the artist did. 'Cause
It
looks like-
is. It is. Earl, why don't you, if you can get the microphone to Earl, it's right there in the middle. He's the one who created these and can. And by the way, we're going to stay and be happy to visit with folks. If you didn't get your question answered, we'll hang around and be happy to talk to
Okay.
us. Man.
Hi, I'm Earl. You're the arborist, right? So I'll address you here in just a minute, okay? The one thing I want to start off with, you asked what's the difference between somebody going out at Neal Canyon right now and carving up a bunch of trees, right? At what point? Yeah, and I'd say that's when you get caught, right? So either you're caught by the authorities or you're caught by these guys, the historians, right?
That's
so
right.
you come to somebody's
That's
interest, right? The authorities are like, you were carving up trees, man, and our arborists don't want you to do that, even though it's not hurting the trees. It's altering, or these guys are like, it's culturally and it's anthropologically irrelevant. I'd like to introduce my collaborator and art partner, Amy, if you wouldn't mind standing up. Amy, come on. So,
Hey.
Amy's the one who carved the beautiful panels that you see here that just throw shadows on everything. And so again, double entendres on so many things. But for the question that was just asked about the castings, I was a non-traditional student, I think late 30s or so when I took, John was offering a class on arbor glyphs. I was interested in art, the book arts, all kinds of other stuff. A professor I really loved at Boise State was like, hey, there's this dude that teaches a class on like sheep herders who carve in trees. And it's like, okay, that sounds weird. So I'd probably like it. And then I met this weird guy and I really liked him. And so he's talking immigration and all of this stuff, and I really got enamored with it. And he's like, we're trying to document it. And he would take students and teams and faculty from other universities. And there was a guy, it was a University of Texas, I think, that came up, a professor, professors from Idaho, University of Idaho. If you're not local, that's kind of the state school. And we're both BSU, but they get the recognition. But anyways, so he just taught this wonderful course, and so I became enamored, and as an artist, I started seeing the mark making, right? And then seeing the evolution of the mark making, which is that evolution of craft with artists and art and mark making. And like John, really specifies, the human need to make for mark making and to leave our mark. And so then, as an artist, you try and figure out, it's like, well what do I do? And so it's like, how can I capture this? And so I started playing around, making plaster casts of the trees, because part of it was I have gotten coordinates from John on particular trees that his classes had documented. And just like he said, I would go there to create a cast, and somebody had cut down the tree and cut down this beautifully artistic nude of a gorgeous, voluptuous woman, and now it's in somebody's man cave, right? And so again, that's where Inaki was talking. It's like, we can't make this available to everyone because people will do the wrong thing too many times. So my deal, I started making plaster casts. Then for the full rounds, that evolved into silicone casts. And my whole deal was, how can I go out there, create a casting of this, and not destroy the arbor glyph, not destroy the art, but document it. In normal, those of you that are sculptors, in normal cast making, you use a release agent like a grease or a solvent that's just nasty, and that's not good on a tree, right? So I used soap, and so I'd go out with Dove soap that they wash down the animals after oil spills. So I'd use that as my release agent, and then afterwards I'd kind of scrub it off the tree. So hunters would be out, see me doing weird stuff. But anyways, so that was it, just trying to figure out how to document these. So
They're beautiful. I think what we'll do is that maybe each of us, okay, question here. Okay, yeah.
So the young fella on this side over here hasn't got
Talk.
to answer any questions, so I'm
Good.
shooting one at you.
Good. He's the
You're-
smartest.
You've got digital reproductions that you're putting into what appear to be 3D things that you can look at on a computer screen or big screen, whatever, on big screen like this. I'm wondering if you're giving thought to, or if you've already thought of this and you're way down the track of digitizing that in a way so that they can be preserved, because that's what we're all talking about here, is the need to preserve these things from nature and from malicious activity. A way to preserve those things digitally so that they could be printed digitally with 3D printers.
Yeah, so any of the models that we create, we have a few different files that we have at the end of the day. We have hundreds of digital images, JPEGs, TIFFs, that are going to be compatible for many years that we can go back and recreate as technology progresses. We'll have the 3D models with the photographic texture data right now, which is great for what you're seeing here. But with that, you can also export what they call an STL file, where you can take it into a 3D printing program. The scale of them, obviously, to recreate it at a representative of what they would be, you would take quite a large 3D printer. But you could scale them down, and to this day, these models that we have, we can print them out for sure. Yeah, that's another way of doing it.
Maybe we'll just wrap up each of us with a line or two about the work that we do or why we do it. Some people say to me, well, why are you doing this stuff? It's graffiti, you know, it's whatever. And there's just one story that really impacted me. My grandparents came over, so it certainly connected to that. But I take students out, we document the arbor glyphs, and I had one student in particular, we had been out, and it turns into an Easter egg hunt. One wants to find the most elaborate, one wants to find the oldest, and students really get into it. One came back to the little van thing crying, and I was just like, uh-oh, what happened here? And I knew her, and I knew her family, and she said, you know, I never knew my dad because he died before I was old enough to really know him. But she had gone up into the trees, found his carvings, and just boom. And it's stories like that keep me coming back, because most of these people are anonymous, again, as we started out. But there's something incredibly powerful about standing in the tracks where they stood and just trying to put yourself in their shoes, almost literally, and just get a sense of what was going on, what were they thinking about, which part of what they do is make a mark on a tree that captures something of their experience. So if we can kind of bring that alive a little bit for somebody's family or for somebody's relative or just the joy of art or whatever, I'm in. So that's what keeps me working on it.
Okay, thank you everyone for being here tonight. It has been a little bit longer than we expected, but I hope we all enjoyed it. We certainly did. Yeah. We are hoping to see you around tomorrow to enjoy the virtual reality experience and to so we can answer any other question you could have. Okay. Thank you so much. Mi Esker.
Good, you guys go.